Imagine a world where a simple cut could turn deadly, or where routine surgeries and cancer treatments become life-threatening. This is not because of a disease itself, but because the medicines we rely on to fight infections simply stop working. This isn't science fiction, it's a looming reality of antimicrobial resistance, a crisis the World Health Organization calls one of the top global health threats of our time. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on antimicrobial resistance, what it means, why it's escalating, and how it could impact every single one of us. Welcome to Emerging Tech Unpacked, a podcast that unpacks emerging tech topics and careers with diverse perspectives. My name is Lucy Lin, and today we have a special episode sponsored by the CSIRO On Innovation program to profile an incredible scientist who is translating big ideas into real-world impact. I am in conversation with a leading medical tech researcher turned founder, Dr. Christine Carson, who is using AI to accelerate the fight against drug-resistant infections. Christine is not just a leading researcher, she's on the front lines, translating breakthrough science into commercialized solutions that is truly life-saving. Get ready for an eye-opening episode about the future of medtech and health tech as we unpack the fascinating topic of antimicrobial resistance. Hello, welcome to Emerging Tech Unpacked podcast. My name is Lucy Lin, and today we'll be talking about infectious diseases, bacteria, and AI with a medical technology expert, Dr. Christine Carson, who is the founder and chief scientific officer of Cytophenix. Welcome to Emerging Tech Unpacked, Christine.
Great to be here, Lucy. Thanks for the opportunity.
Christine, we've had some tech issues, but I'm so glad to solve them. But it's been a little bit of an ordeal, but we got there. And I'm really happy to have you on the podcast because I think this is going to be a super interesting episode. It is all about how can we get better. It is about global health. It's all about infectious diseases and it's about emerging technology. So I'm really excited to have you as a podcast guest on our podcast. You are a leading researcher in this space. Can you tell us a little bit about your interest in science, especially from when you were younger, and then what really interested you in this area, microbiology, antimicrobial research, as an adult now?
Yeah, so in hindsight, it's probably inevitable that I ended up in the place I am now because I look back and as a child, I was pathologically curious. So when I left school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew that I had that curiosity, so I went off to university and did a science degree. Of all the subjects that I came across during my time there, microbiology was the one I enjoyed the most. And once I hit post-grad studies with microbiology, so honours and then onto a PhD, I just felt like I'd come home. So I just fell in love with the process. You know, it was I could ask and answer questions and get paid for it. So it was just to me, it was a completely natural place for me to end up.
You told me that you're a very curious person. Is science for curious people?
Yeah, look, I think curious people can do really well in science, having that inner drive to just keep asking more questions. It would drive some people crazy, but for other people, it's just like this inner fire. Like, why is that like that? How does it do that? What happens if I do this? What if this is, out of place? And what happens then? So it's just, that endless stream of questions, which is really helpful to you if you're trying to forge a career in research.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit? You've got a very storied career so far, being a research fellow and now, as an entrepreneur. But can you describe a pivotal point in your career that's really shaped your approach in tackling antimicrobial resistance research?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things, I guess, and one of them, early on, you realise that having that knowledge, having that information is fantastic, but it's no good in my head. So, for a start, you've got to get that information out to a wider audience, to people who might be able to do something more with it than I'm able to do. Also, with when I began working with a group who were looking at antimicrobial resistance and better diagnostic tests, it's one thing to have an idea, and it's another thing to have an IVD diagnostic test that can be used in a laboratory to help diagnose patients' illnesses and infections. So, there is there's a big journey between having an idea and an IVD test, and I wanted to be part of that journey because it doesn't happen on its own. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and I knew that the only way the particular idea that our group had, the only way that was going to benefit patients was if it became an IVD, and the only people who could make that happen or at least get a substantial part of it done was us, was the academic group that we were working in.
Yeah. Can you explain what IBD is a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, so IVD is in vitro, so in the laboratory, in vitro diagnostic. And so we'll talk a bit about IVD tests, and they are the kinds of tests that get done on samples that come from patients and are taken to clinical laboratories for testing. So when you give a sample, whether it's a blood or urine, and it goes off to a laboratory, a whole range of in vitro diagnostic tests are performed on that sample. So IVD tests are used to try and work out what's going on for you. And they are highly regulated so that their performance is known to be good. Regulation is a good thing. The standards are high. That's also a good thing. And so our goal is to turn our idea into an IVD test where it will benefit the most number of people.
Yeah, amazing. Okay. I think a lot of people don't really know a lot about the scientific pathway. So, how does a scientist get to, where you are now? I guess like what's the process of a scientific pathway in terms of maybe even, looking at how you can develop or analyze infectious diseases, which is what your specialty is.
Yeah. So, what tends to happen in science, once you've done a basic undergraduate science degree, you'll often go and work in a laboratory and think about whether or not you want to do postgraduate studies. So, that would usually start with either an honours degree, so another year, or a master's degree, which would be a longer course of work. And particularly in the life sciences, that usually involves doing laboratory work. Not always, but often. And while you're doing that laboratory work and contributing to your higher degree, then you soon work out whether or not that is a process that suits you, and whether it's something that you enjoy and that you can do well. If you want to have a long term career in science, then usually that means getting a PhD along the way. Again, not always. And there are many different turns in the career path that people can take. There isn't one way to do it. Getting a degree, an honours degree, and then a PhD is a very common pathway. And you end up working in one discipline and usually a subspecialty of that one subject. And you'll gain knowledge and skills in the kinds of experiments that you need to run in that space, but you're always learning. In science, in research, you are always acquiring new skills, you're always learning, you're always looking to see how you can link in with specialists in other fields that relate to yours, but in which you may not be an expert, to try and advance your story, their story together.
Mm. And how fitting that you're sitting in a library, right? It's constant learning.
Yeah, yeah. So plenty of knowledge on the walls behind me. Yeah.
Yeah. So your research is all about antimicrobial resistance, which I think is, for a lot of people who don't know, it's a massive, massive problem. The World Health Organization says that antimicrobial resistance has already contributed to nearly 5 million deaths already globally, which is a massive number. Like, I think I don't think it's something that a lot of people do know about. But why is antimicrobial resistance considered one of the biggest threats to global health today?
Yeah, look, antimicrobial resistance is genuinely a really big problem. And I think of it as the climate change of medicine. So, the reason that antimicrobial resistance is such a big issue is because, first, let's start with a definition of antimicrobial resistance, which is Let's say you have an infection caused by a microbe. Now, that microbe might be bacteria or fungi or viruses, but they're all microbes. And you'll usually go to your doctor. The doctor will give you a medicine that is designed to inhibit or kill that microbe. So it's an antimicrobial. Now, in many cases, that antimicrobial is targeted against bacteria, and there's an even more specific name for that. We call that an antibiotic. So you'll go to your doctor with an infection, you're given some type of antimicrobial agent, you take that antimicrobial agent, and your infection is resolved. You're cured. And it usually happens pretty quickly, and you get on with your life. What happens in antimicrobial resistance is you go to the doctor, you get the medicine, you take the medicine, but the microbes, for a variety of reasons, no longer respond to that medicine, and your infection doesn't go away and continues to get worse. And that's an antimicrobial resistant infection. And sometimes they can be deadly. Already we know that there are 5 million deaths every year due to antimicrobial resistant infections. They're either directly or indirectly caused by microbes that our medicines no longer work against. It's 5 million deaths every year.
That's
Even
a
in
lot. What are some of the things, like, is it tuberculosis? Is it malaria? Are these the types of infections that you're talking about?
They're certainly included in that number, and in fact, drug resistant or antimicrobial resistant infections with tuberculosis play a big part in that. Many malaria parasites no longer respond to the antimicrobial agents that people receive, and bacteria and fungi are starting to become increasingly resistant to the antimicrobial medicines that we use against them also. So, whereas previously, if you had pneumonia, you could take a course of antibiotics. Pneumonia is a serious infection, but you could take antibiotics and you could reliably get better.
Mm.
Now, pneumonia is caused by bacteria that have become resistant to many of the common antibiotics. You might continue to get worse while we work out that the particular bacteria that you have is not going to respond to the medicine you've been given. And so then they have to find a different medicine. And often the different medicine may be more expensive, or it may be more toxic to you. Eventually, there are even some infections that won't respond to any antibiotics that we have. And that's when infections become deadly.
Wow. You think that, with something like pneumonia, it would be solved by now, but, clearly if your body is resistant to it, or, the bacteria is resistant to it, then then you will still pass. And, I think that's where I think, it is that's why it's such a global issue. And I know that, if you look at, like, well, I was reading about, World Health Organization, and again, it states that antimicrobial resistance affects all countries in
Yeah.
all regions and across all income levels. So it doesn't matter if you're a football player, or a war veteran, or someone who's incredibly healthy, but this transcends everybody, which I find it really interesting. So is it that, people in the West, which are known to be, more wealthier versus, say, a third world country, are they going to find it a lot tougher against this?
Yeah, they will. So certainly countries, low and middle income countries, they have fewer resources to put into healthcare in the first place. And
Mm,
then when things do go wrong in the health system, they've got less resources to deal with, say, antimicrobial resistant infections. And the other reason that antimicrobial resistance affects all of us, it's not just if you get an infection. Let's say you want to have a knee replacement or a hip replacement or a heart valve repair, or you need to have a cesarean to deliver a baby.
mm,
All of those operations are possible because we have antibiotics. Anyone undergoing a significant surgical procedure, so all of the ones I mentioned and many, many more,
and
while
chemotherapy
Yep.
as well?
While having those operations, they receive antibiotics to minimize the risk that they will get an infection arising from performing the operation. Afterwards, wounds need to heal. Sometimes they get infected, and we just assume that we can give those patients an antibiotic and those infections will resolve. So, antibiotics, they make modern medicine possible. We can cure cancer now. There are so many types of cancer that we can manage or cure successfully now compared to decades ago. But often, while people are having those cancer treatments, their immune systems are very compromised and they are vulnerable to infections. So it's incredible that we can cure all these dreadful types of cancer. But while people are undergoing treatment, and sometimes afterwards as well, their immune systems don't work quite like they used to. They're vulnerable to infections. Now, if they get an infection that can be treated with antibiotics, fantastic. Treat with antibiotics, they get better. But if their immune system is compromised and they get an infection caused by an antibiotic resistant bacteria, then it can become very, very difficult to cure that infection. So, because they had to have cancer treatment, they were vulnerable. They ended up getting an infection that was drug resistant, and that may be what leads to their death. So, again, this is why antimicrobial resistance is a big problem to all of medicine. We rely so heavily on antimicrobial agents to just deal with infection when and if it happens. And so much of modern medicine relies on that capability. It's incredible.
Yeah, well, hence why it's such a big global issue, right? And it's going to get worse, I'm assuming. Is that right? From what you've been saying.
Yeah.
Don't want to everybody, but
Look, the problem, we're aware of the problem. There are a small number of, people who are working very hard to raise awareness and draw attention to the fact that this process is happening and that we need to put in multiple strategies to manage it. There's not a one size fits all cure for antimicrobial resistance. Many, many strategies will feed into managing it, reducing it, and making it less of a problem. So it requires action on so many fronts. There are, people who are really committed to spreading the word about antimicrobial resistance. Sometimes people don't necessarily feel like they're being listened to. There's a lot of interest in how many new antibiotics are coming along, and we talk about that antibiotic pipeline. Uh, and, ideally, there would be dozens of antibiotics in development. There aren't. There's a handful. And we really do need, because antibiotics don't last forever because bugs become resistant, we always need new antibiotics coming through the pipeline, new ones being developed, new ones being available to patients, and then gradually over time they may lose um, their activity. But hopefully there's new ones coming in the pipeline. The problem is the pipeline isn't very full. So there's many people raising the alarm about that. We need better diagnostic tests so that we can tell if patients have an infection, what infection it is, what microbe, bacteria, fungi, or virus is infecting them. And then the next one is what drug, what antibiotic or antimicrobial agent will work best against what's causing their infection. And that's the space that Cytophenix is working in, identifying in hours instead of days which antibiotic will work best against bacterial infections.
yeah. And that's your company.
Yeah. So that's the company that we started once we'd identified some tech inside our university and knew that it could benefit patients, but only if we turned it into an in vitro diagnostic test. As an idea, it was great, but it wasn't going to help anyone. If we turned it into a test, it was going to help the most number of people the soonest.
Yeah, amazing. I do want to get into how you've positioned, like, transitioned yourself from research to a founder. But can we go back to basics just a tiny bit? Because I think it would be good to kind of paint the background of how the body and medication works. And then I'd love to continue on and talk about the emerging tech, because there's so many things that I think people just don't know about, and I'm really glad that we started this conversation about the importance of infection and medication, and potentially how we need new ones, new pipelines, constant new pipelines moving forward. So there's been a lot of talk around the difference between antimicrobial resistance, but also antibiotic resistance as well. Can you tell us the difference between these things in a very simple way? Because as you said, I think there's the reason why people don't know about it is because I think there's not enough information, and I think there is a lot of confusion around this, and hence why we're doing this podcast is that we want to debunk that. But I'd love to start with there.
Yeah. So the two terms, antimicrobial resistance and antibiotic resistance, they're related. So the kinds of living things that cause infections, a general term for them is microbes, and the microbes can be bacteria or fungi or viruses, and there are some additional ones as well. But let's just stick with those three. So now, if you think about the word antimicrobial, so it's anti-microbe. So these are medicines that are designed to inhibit or kill the microbes that cause infection. So antimicrobial agents is a very broad term, and it includes medicines that work against bacteria, against fungi, viruses, and others. So whenever you hear antimicrobial resistance, you know that people are talking very generally about the medicines we use against the microbes that cause infection and how those microbes are becoming resistant to those medicines. When you look at the other term, antibiotic resistance, that's a similar term but much more specific. So we reserve the word antibiotic specifically for bacteria. And when you think about the word, bio is sort of, biology, it's about life. And so antibiotic is anti-life. And that term was put together when antibiotics were discovered. That's what they called them. And the idea was that the chemicals they had discovered, the compounds they developed, could inhibit or kill bacteria. And so they were anti life of the bacteria. So when people talk about antibiotic resistance, they're specifically referring to how bacteria become resistant to antibiotics. When the term antimicrobial resistance is used, it's a similar phenomenon, but much broader against bacteria and fungi and viruses and others.
Yeah, excellent. That's great to hear. And what are antibiotics in general, and how do they work to treat infections?
Yeah, so antibiotics are really quite clever, and what they do is they leverage the differences between humans and bacteria. So, of all the things that go on inside a human, from a metabolic perspective, so all of the things that make up humans, there are differences in those to bacteria. So, bacteria, here's one example. There are a group of antibiotics that work by preventing bacteria from building the bacterial cell wall. So, all bacteria have a cell wall, and part of that cell wall, let's think of it like a brick wall. And some of the antibiotics that are used very widely actually interfere with the process by which bacteria build that brick wall. So when a bacteria goes to multiply, it needs to build a new brick wall for the cells that it's dividing into. But if there's an antibiotic around that interferes with the building of a brick wall, it stops that building process from happening. So the bacteria are inhibited, or better still, they're killed because they can't complete that multiplication cycle. And so the antibiotics have interfered with a process that only goes on in bacteria. We don't have our cell walls are differently, they're put together differently. So the antibiotic doesn't interfere with anything inside the human, it just interferes with the bacteria. And that's what makes antibiotics so useful as a medicine. They are selectively toxic only to the bacteria. They're not toxic to us.
Yeah, I love that analogy with the brick wall. That's really good.
Yeah.
Should use that more often to educate others, and that's so much easier to understand. So, what does it mean when, like, when you say the bacteria is resistant to antibiotics? Can you use antibiotics to also treat viral infections like the flu, and the cold as well?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and there's growing awareness that antibiotics won't help with a viral infection because viruses don't have those building blocks that the bacteria have. So there's nothing in a virus that the brick interfering antibiotic medicine can target. You can mix as much antibiotic into a viral infection as you want, but the viruses don't have a brick wall in the same way that bacteria do. So there's nothing for the antibiotic to target. That's why antibiotics are useless when it comes to treating viral infections. There are medicines that work specifically against viruses, but they're often very, very specific to a particular virus. Like you have to invent an antiviral medicine that works against influenza. And it will only work against influenza because it's found some little point of difference between humans and viruses or influenza. And it's exploited that difference to target that process so that only the virus is inhibited and not the human. And we don't have as many drugs or medicines to treat viral infections as we do have antibiotics to treat bacterial infections. But then we also have more vaccines against viral infections too. So you can be immunized against many viral infections. So that helps a lot.
Mm. Do you do the flu shot every winter?
I do tend to do the flu shot every winter, particularly if I'm traveling. So, the moment you start traveling, whether it's nationally or internationally, and you're putting yourself into situations where there's lots of crowds or you're crammed into an aeroplane with several hundred other people for, multiple hours, it's all about risk benefit. And if I'm going to put myself in those high exposure situations, which is perfectly fine, it's a normal part of life, it helps to have that protection on board. So I do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I hate getting sick, I absolutely hate it. It's so weird because I used to be, the most healthiest person as a child, and I used to win the award of, like, attending school every single day and not missing a day, and then I feel like as an adult, my immune system has just decreased a lot. Um, I feel like it's starting to get better, like, I haven't been sick yet in the last almost a year, which is so unusual because I'm asthmatic and usually I would have at least, some kind of really bad cold or flu every single year, multiple times a year. So, is there any correlations between your age, and immunity as well, you think?
Yeah, that's certainly an important point. Your immune system is different when you're a child from when you're an adult to a much older person. So, things that might make you ill when you're a child, but you bounce back within 24 hours, you might get sicker when you're in your middle years and take a little bit long to recover. And when you take it to the next step, so say to very elderly people, infections like be really serious, if not life threatening. So, it can be infection with the same microbe, bacteria, fungi, or viruses, but because of your age and the status of your immune system, your body responds differently to it and manages the infection differently. So, no, age is certainly a factor. And, I mentioned before that when people have many treatments for cancer, will compromise your immune system. And so people undergoing cancer treatments are often immunocompromised, so they're more vulnerable to infections. So things that a healthy person who's not undergoing treatment for cancer might be able to, be exposed to and simply not get ill might make another person very unwell, if not, life-threatening infection.
Yeah. Another thing I've heard about is this term called superbugs. Now, I thought they were kind of like a Marvel superhero, good people. But I think they are more like the villains, actually, Christine. Can you tell us a little bit more about who they are, what they do, and why are they such a concern?
Yeah, no, you're right. So usually when you put super in front of something, you think it's going to be a good thing, and perhaps it is a good thing for the bugs. They are super bugs. So the idea is that there might be a bacterium that is a particular antibiotic can inhibit and kill that bacterium. So there's no issue there. But as the bacteria is continuously exposed to a particular antibiotic, it might develop ways to evade the killing effects of the antibiotic and become a superbug. So it's bad for us, good for the bug. And so a bug that was previously could be treated, an infection that it causes could be treated by antibiotics. If it's become a superbug, it may not be able to be treated by that antibiotic anymore. And that's when you start looking at alternatives, and hopefully there are alternatives. So, superbug, good for the bug, bad for us.
How do you get rid of them?
So usually there are sort of tiers of antibiotics. So there's the kinds of antibiotics that you get if you are presenting to your GP and you have an infection, and they're kind of very common antibiotics. And then if you're in hospital with a particular type of infection, there's those antibiotics that your GP has access to, and then there's like another tier of antibiotics that might be used more commonly, not exclusively, but more commonly inside hospitals. And then if they're failing, there's usually a small group of antibiotics that might be held in reserve for the most serious infections. And so then you hope that one of those works. If none of those work, then there are some older antibiotics that people prefer not to use because they can be quite toxic. They might be brought out to be tried. And then there are a few new antibiotics coming to market around the world. And even though they're not available in Australia, it may be that there is some indication that your particular infection, which hasn't responded to anything else that's been thrown at it, might respond to one of those new antibiotics. And there are various schemes available, which mean you can get access to that antibiotic only for that patient, only for that infection. So they're called special access schemes, and they're important too, to helping a few patients who have really difficult to treat infections. And, sometimes people do die simply because their infection couldn't be managed with an antibiotic, it couldn't be cured.
Yeah. It's incredible, isn't it? Like when you're not feeling well and you're like, "What is wrong with me?" And you just have to go it's really hard to kind of analyze and find out what's wrong, you know? And you go through all these steps, and it's why it takes so long. And sometimes, like, maybe the medication's not even available in your country, as you've just said. So,
Correct.
what do you do there?
And with serious infections, we know that the time it takes to get patients onto the right antibiotic, to an antibiotic that's likely to be effective, the time that it takes, impacts the likelihood that a person's going to live or die. So the time it takes to diagnose an infection is really important. The time it takes to get those test results back about which antibiotic would be best to use, that time is important. It matters.
Yeah, fascinating. So, the father of this space, Sir Alexander Fleming, who's known for discovering world's first effective antibiotic substance, the penicillin, um, famously warned that bacteria will become resistant to antibiotics due to overuse. And, in his 1945 Nobel lecture, he also talked about underdosing as well. So, how can misuse or overuse of antibiotics leads to more resistance and the problem that we're facing now?
Yeah, so truth be told, any use of antibiotics contributes, even, a small amount, to the development of antimicrobial resistance. The point is you want to so because any use essentially induces antimicrobial resistance, you only want to use it when you really need it. So, you only want to treat infections, let's say in the case of antibiotics, you only want to treat infections that are caused by bacteria against which antibiotics will work. And in so you want to use antibiotics that you have some confidence will work. You want to know confidently that the person has an infection with bacteria. Uh, and you only want to treat for the amount of time to get their infection under control and resolved. You know, Once it gets to a point where they are essentially better and the infection is cured, to keep treating, all it does is expose more bugs to the antibiotic and encourage the development of resistance. So that's why people put a lot of effort into diagnosing infections. They like to make certain that you do have an infection caused by bacteria. You do have an infection that will respond to a particular antibiotic. You do only need to take your antibiotics for 7 days or 9 days or, 2 weeks. And that's another reason why it's important to use the course of antibiotics that your doctor prescribes. Use it as they told you to use it and for the time that they told you to use it.
Mm. I'm a bit naughty sometimes that I don't always finish my complete course of prescribed antibiotics because I'm like, I feel better now. I don't want to continue because, I don't want to I don't want to rely on this. But you're telling me that's actually a bad thing.
Well, look, it's always a conversation, and you can have that conversation with your doctor, and it also depends on the consequences. So, if you've got a minor infection for which you needed to take antibiotics, and you are feeling much better, and and the infection's looking good, if it's a visible one, then I can understand why people might stop short of finishing a course. But if you've had life-threatening infection, and you kind of feel a bit better, I'd certainly be encouraging people to consider taking the entire course as directed by their doctor, and at the very least have a conversation with their doctor about how they might change that if they've got strong feelings about it. But the recommendation that people use the antibiotics in the way they've been prescribed, helps manage the use of antibiotics and the development of antimicrobial resistance. So look, people need to just be sensible, have conversations with their doctors, and try and do the right thing.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. I've heard a lot about because I was a bit annoyed with some friends whenever I'm, 'cause in terms of annoyed with friends who are never sick, but I suspect they can be asymptomatic carriers, and they probably have given me a bit of a cold or whatever. But I want to talk about the role of asymptomatic people, because I'm assuming that, something may cause me to be ill, but has no effect on other people, as an example. So what challenges do they pose for public health as well and infection control?
Yeah, so it really depends on what microbe we're talking about. So, um, and we always have to remember that we are covered with and full of microbes. Okay, they live on us, in us, around us. They're everywhere, and
Really?
yeah, and mostly they're good for us. So,
Wow.
and the other thing is that just because you're carrying, as let's say you're carrying a bacteria that can potentially make you sick, doesn't mean it's going to make you sick. It might make somebody else sick. So you might be a healthy middle-aged person, and you carry a bacterium in your gut that is resistant to all sorts of antibiotics. But while you're healthy, it poses very little risk to you at all. But if you go and visit somebody who maybe they're having treatment for cancer, or maybe they're very elderly and they're in an aged care home, and let's say in the course of that visit, you leave your bug behind, it may do them some harm. So it
Mm.
was unlikely to harm you, but it could be quite harmful to them. So things like washing your hands, good personal hygiene, all of those things then become important.
So is everybody a type of asymptomatic carrier then as well in your definition just now?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a long bow, but yes, the bugs that I carry, I'm healthy with my set of bugs and they don't bother me right now. But let's
Mm.
say having treatment for a cancer or something else happened to me that compromised my immune system, maybe some of my own bugs might become a problem to me, or I might share them with someone for whom they are a problem. So, it's another reason why just being sensible around, we it's easy to think that basic hygiene isn't always necessary or over the top, or but it's just good practice. It's good to share bugs, but it's also good to not share too many of them. So,
Yeah, no. I'm always constantly washing my hands, and I think that's a good thing. I've seen some people who don't wash their hands, and I'm shocked by that. But yeah, yeah, small things like that is so important in terms
yeah.
of great hygiene, to prevent all this as well. Um, so there's a lot of I've heard whispers in antibiotics usage in agriculture. Does this contribute to resistance in humans as a result of, antibiotics placed in, say, food stock that we give to animals?
Yeah, so look, there's been a lot of focus on the use of antimicrobials in general in food
Mm.
production. So, for a long time, giving antibiotics to animals as they were grown in preparation for us to eat them. So antibiotics were actually incorporated into their feedstock. And the idea was that the antibiotics would promote the growth of the animal, keep it healthy, and promote the growth of the animal so it would um, get ready to be a meat producing animal sooner. And, using antibiotics on that scale, you're just going to encourage all of the bacteria that live on and in those animals to become resistant to that antibiotic. And the antibiotics that are used in animal production are often similar to the antibiotics that are used in human medicine. So if you train up the bacteria to be resistant in animals and then somehow those bacteria make their way into humans, and it might be simply because you work with those animals, or perhaps, small residues of the bacteria in the animals make it through the meat and food chain. For whatever reason, those bugs make it into humans and they make humans sick. If they've developed resistance to antibiotics that are similar to the antibiotics we use in human medicine, that can be a problem for us. So, there's a lot of scrutiny of using antibiotics in animal food production. And certainly in Australia, the use of those antibiotics is very controlled. It has reduced tremendously over the last few decades. There are some countries in Europe where, antibiotics are allowed to be used in animals for animal health reasons. So if animals are sick, they can receive antibiotics, but they can't, antibiotics are no longer allowed to be incorporated into feed to give to the animals on a general day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I tell you what, like, it's making me rethink about eating steak and hamburger, like, because, um,
Yeah.
uh
Well, a number of years ago, let's just say one of the big globally franchised hamburger chains committed to using meat in its food that was raised without antibiotics. And it was a tremendous undertaking when they made the announcement a few years ago. And then things must have changed internally, because a couple of years later they said, look, we're not going to be able to achieve. That was a lofty goal of reducing food chain, we're not going to be able to do it, and they basically backed away from it. That's how ingrained antibiotic use was in their particular food chain. It's an issue that we do need to face, because the more you use antibiotics, the more resistance you'll get. It's sod's law, I think. So
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think that it's not just, you getting sick, it's in your food, it's in loads of different areas as well. No, I have to think about my vegetarianism, I think, or veganism.
yeah,
Um,
I'm not there
so
yet.
yeah. So you are a very curious person and you are a problem solver. And you touched on briefly that you are pivoting from research into entrepreneurship. What's made you motivated into moving from academic research into finding your own business?
Yeah, so I mentioned before about impact. And so in the lab, so let's think of the setting as an academic university laboratory. And we've got a way of looking at bacteria after they've been exposed to antibiotics and being able to decide in just a matter of hours which antibiotic will be the most effective against those bacteria. Now, that's a marvelous academic observation. Yay, everyone, goes off and writes a paper. It has hypothetically, that could be used in a clinical laboratory where diagnostic testing is performed. But to turn it into the type of test that can be used in that setting, a lot more has to happen. And really, the only people motivated to make it happen are the people who kind of invented the test, know the ins and outs of it, can see the impact that it could have if it made it into a diagnostic testing laboratory. So they're kind of the people who are motivated. So that was us. The only people that were going to take our idea and our technology forward and turn it into a test that could benefit the maximum number of people was us. And if not us, then it was going to be written up as a paper, published in a peer reviewed scientific journal, and that's probably where it would have sat for the rest of forever. There are other people trying to solve the same problem with similar rapid approaches, but we were very impressed with the features that our particular approach had. We felt that it offered significant advantages over other approaches. And, the only people that were going to move that forward was us. Like, that's just the way of the world. So it was us or no one. So we're giving it a really good crack.
Yeah, amazing. So can you tell us a little bit more about your solution? And I know that it is, all about technology. It's a bit of AI as well, which is very exciting. How are you using technology into this very scientific area to be able to, you know, um, improve faster and more precise information?
Yeah, so one of the strengths of our test is that we do when somebody is thought to have a serious infection, someone will take often a blood sample from them and send the blood sample to the lab, and that blood sample is actually incubated in an incubator for as long as it takes to decide whether or not there are bacteria in that person's blood. Once once that is known that there are bacteria in the blood, it used to take another 2 or more days to decide which antibiotic was the best antibiotic to use.
Right.
So, in comparison with our test, once you know that there's a bacteria in the person's blood and you've got that bacterium, we can tell you 4 hours later which antibiotic to use. And what we've done is we've taken the best parts of existing tests and we've sped the process up dramatically. So you used to have to incubate for a full day to then assess the test. We only incubate for 3 hours. You used to assess the test literally visually. You would look at the result and measure it with your eyes as to whether an antibiotic had had an effect or not. We put our we incubate for 3 hours, and then we put our test onto a piece of equipment called a flow cytometer. And the flow cytometer takes tens of thousands of measurements, of all the bacteria in the test and generates just mountains of data. And so one of the other key features of our test is that you can analyze all that data manually, but it takes too long. Or you can get AI to analyze it for you. And that's done in, under 5 minutes. So we've sped up the incubation. We only have to incubate for 3 hours, not 24. We've increased the amount of data that is acquired when an assay is performed, and so you can tell so much more nuance because we capture so many more measurements. And then we've got AI software analyzing that complex data and really giving really confident decisions on what's going on for in those tests. So we've just sped the whole process up. We've applied AI to the complex analytical task at the end, and that's how we're able to do in under 4 hours what used to take at least 24 hours. And in fact, that it used to take at least 24 hours plus you actually had to do another growth step before you could even start that 24-hour process, and we skipped that. So our test is faster because it doesn't require an interim growth step and the test itself is much shorter.
Yeah, amazing. Did you ever think that you'll see technology help science in such a way and, reducing the time of getting results, like it's that's a huge difference.
Yeah, it is a big difference. And, we know there are so many publications about how the time that it takes to get patients onto the right antibiotic, you know, correlates with their risk of death.
Mm,
People who got onto the right antibiotic sooner have a higher chance of living,
mm.
surviving. And people that took longer to get onto the right antibiotic, an antibiotic that would work, have an increased risk of death. That's so many people have shown that now in multiple publications, many sites around the world, different ways of looking at the same patterns, and the data is clear. You know, Patients with life-threatening infections in their blood caused by bacteria need to be on effective antimicrobial therapy or antibiotic therapy as soon as possible. And our test helps make that happen.
Yeah, amazing. Is this something that you how did the idea come about and how did you go down this path of putting it together?
Yeah, so I joined an academic research group in 2017, and there were two PhD students who'd been working away at this for a little while, and they'd seen some patterns. And so it had really started with one student, one PhD student who'd seen some patterns. And then when a second PhD student came along, he was able to add, a lot more detail to the analysis of the flow cytometry data. And between them, they worked out that they could see very early um, strong patterns that correlated with which antibiotic would actually work. And I guess that's when the seed of the idea was born that this could be, with a bit more work, this could be an IVD test that could be used in labs to help make these decisions for patients. So I joined the group at about that stage. And we worked for another several years on academic grants. So it was still an academic interest, and we could be supported legitimately by, grants, research grants, purely research grants. And then later, we did the ON program, and we also attracted a West Australian state government grant, which was a translational commercialisation focused grant. And that was really the first time we'd been externally funded to really start to make that pivot towards, right, this is it, we're doing this, we're going to turn this idea into an IVD so that it can have the impact we believe it can have.
Yeah. So you referenced very quickly about the ON program, which is CSIRO, which is Australia's National Science Agency. So they have an ON innovation program to help researchers commercialize their deep tech ideas, like your one. Um, can you tell us a little bit more about why this is valuable for you? And any lessons or skills that you've also acquired.
Yeah.
Pardon.
So, yeah, look, the ON program was fantastic for us. So, I mentioned about how this idea was born in an academic university setting. And then when we got that first state government grant, we actually joined forces with a local software development firm who have expertise in this area. And so, our academic group collaborated with a local software firm, all supported by this state government grant. And that really got the automation of the analysis, going at full speed. And, we found out that we could work well together and that, both the teams were interested in pursuing this and turning it into an IVD product. So that was kind of like a practice run, I guess, to working together and formally spinning out a company and just going for it. At about the same
On co-founders that you can work with too.
Yeah, exactly. So we got to test run each other. So that was quite good. And we all still wanted to work together. So we did.
Right.
At about the same time, we had come across the CSIRO on program and we were able to participate in the boot camp. I think the series of events had been disrupted a bit by COVID in the previous years, so we did like a crash course boot camp late in probably 2023, and it's a very well structured program and it supports founders really well. And we're quite a big founding team, so almost all of our team was involved in getting to that boot camp, and then we were subsequently accepted onto the on program, which ran, for the next 6 or 7 months beyond that. And, so we found that the on program was just so good for helping us. They've codified the commercialization process to a large extent. And, we were all either academics or software development people with little experience at commercializing something from the ground up. So we had a lot to learn, and the CSIRO program certainly packed it in there. They did an awesome job of working us through all the things that we needed to think about, some more than others. But, they just took you through the long list of all the things that you need to consider and keep considering all the way through your commercialization journey. Um, you have a lot of balls in the air when you are commercializing anything. If you're trying to commercialize a diagnostic test, I think it's even more intense. But the CSIRO program was just so useful for us at it really catalyzed us into action and thinking about how we were going to get the resources we need to convert this academic idea into an IVD test. So it really helped our founding group get going on the right foot and get moving in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and you're doing so well now, and which is really exciting because, like, I think what you're trying to do is a very big problem that you're looking to solve, and it's fantastic that there are programs like this can help you get this out because I think we need to have this research out. We need to have it commercialized to be able to save lives, as we've been talking about this entire time. I want to talk about some of the challenges because, I feel like funding is a big challenge. You talked a lot about research grants. Can you tell us about the state of research grants and like developing any antibiotics often takes 10 to 15 years, I've read. So really, how do you balance long-term innovation with urgent clinical needs?
Yeah. So look, we were quite fortunate in terms of the timing. So there's been a lot of interest and focus in Australia in the last few years at turning our obvious high performance in an academic knowledge acquisition sense into converting that and translating it into commercialized products. And so, we were fortunate that we had this idea, came across our paths at just the right time. So that first state government grant was, really useful to us. The progress that we made during that really made us competitive for another commercialization opportunity, which was through the curator program. And so we were able to attract curator funding as well. At the same time, we got into the CSIRO on Accelerate program, which helped us elevate our thinking and our strategy around what we were trying to do. We completed that process. Meanwhile, we successfully achieved everything we said we'd do for curator. So we got curator follow on funding. And, we probably managed to achieve all the things in curator one partly because we'd had all of that input and synthesis around our thinking through the on program. So then we got curated two, and one thing leads to another. So it's really important to, that first opportunity is key. And it's still, confess, it's still frustrating because, if we had more resources, we'd be going even faster. So, this is a resource dependent process. We're doing very well, but we could move even more quickly with more resources. And, your point about, you know, people could benefit from this test right now. Like, you know, the evidence is really clear.
Mm.
You know, a slow time to the right antibiotic increases people's risk of death. There's no doubt that people are dying because they don't end up on the right antibiotic soon enough. We can help address that. So we would like to go as fast as we can. And we're doing our best.
Yeah, yeah. Can you tell us why? Like, because I've seen stats like this is a very expensive process as well. Like World Bank estimates that antimicrobial resistance could result in $1 trillion of additional healthcare costs by 2050. But the study says that drug development ranges from, hundreds of thousands of hundreds of $1 million to billions of dollars, depending on failures and therapeutic area. Why does it take so much money to develop antibiotics?
Yeah, so particularly for antibiotics, there's so much testing that needs to be done to know which bacteria. Say you've got a lead candidate, a lead compound that you think is the next antibiotic. There are so many bacteria that you need to test it against to decide which bacteria your antibiotic will target in the future.
Mm.
Then there is so much toxicity testing that needs to be done to understand whether or not your lead candidate compound will be safe to give to humans. There might be, any number of lead candidates that kill bacteria, but do they also kill the human? So, there's a lot of time and testing goes there as well. And then you need to start, the multiple phases of studies that you need to do sometimes in animals, but always eventually in humans, where you start to dose healthy humans, and then you might start to dose humans with not too serious infections. And then, if you pass all of those stages, eventually you get into treating the infection that you were hoping to target in the first place. So, look, it all takes time, it all takes resources. Investors like to see things, investors or pharma companies, whoever's behind supporting it, need to see each step successfully passed to feel confident enough to put the money in to go to the next stage. So, everyone's hoping that, a compound will get across the line, get to market, and there will be a financial reward for getting it into market. And perhaps, with antibiotics, it's that financial reward part that sometimes comes into question,
Mm.
because antibiotics, you don't take them for very long. Even if you've got pneumonia, you might, that's a serious life-threatening infection. You might only take antibiotics for a couple of weeks or a few weeks. If you compare that to, let's say you've got high cholesterol and you take Lipitor or Zocor, you're going to take that for 30 or 40 years.
Well, my some pharmaceuticals, they're not investing in antibiotic research because they cite low profitability as a reason.
It is a genuine reason. They're not, in the end, pharmaceutical companies are companies and they have to make a profit.
Mm.
And it's easier and more reliable for them to make a profit, um, on many other families of drugs than it is in antibiotics. So antibiotics aren't aren't something that big pharmaceutical companies tend to invest a lot in. Many big pharmaceutical companies have gotten out of antibiotic development, and there are little companies around the world who are persevering and doing what they can, but they have limited resources. Um, yeah, so it's a big issue.
That's a massive issue. So who is going to fund this then?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a variety of people will fund it. So there is some private investment in the space. There is some investment from one or two big pharmaceutical companies. There is some government investment in it. I don't know yet that if there's certainly not enough investment in it because we don't have enough antibiotics in that antibiotic pipeline. Uh, so we do risk running out of new ones. Um, it's a good question that I don't have an answer for.
It's a bit sad, isn't it?
Yeah, is we do need antibiotics. Modern
Yeah.
medicine relies on us being able to treat infection. Infection largely relies on us having antibiotics. We're not making enough new ones. It's a problem.
Well, come on, government. Come on, private investors. We need all the funding we can get into this
And look,
big
there are,
important.
the complexity of antibiotic markets is becoming more widely appreciated, and people understand why it's not the most desirable market to get into. So governments are starting in some places to put in place systems that they call them pull incentives. So in the United Kingdom, for example, they're they're either have or are about to implement a subscription model where they will pay a company to have a new antibiotic um, developed, approved, and sitting on the shelf ready to be used if it's needed. And they will pay a company simply to have an antibiotic sitting up on the shelf ready to be used when it's needed. And they're calling that a subscription model. Uh, and so that will go some way towards incentivizing companies to develop products, get them approved by the regulatory authorities, get them manufactured and sitting on shelves ready to be used if needed. And even if they're not used, the companies will get paid.
Mm.
So it's quite a radical idea, but
Yeah.
is kind of an unusual use case when it comes to medicines.
Yeah.
So,
No, I love it. I think we need to think outside the box in terms
yep.
of how we can, get companies interested in this because, like, I don't think it's anyone's interest to see more deaths, because then they don't even have anyone to sell to. And, yeah, so I think this is a huge issue and a huge problem, and yeah, and if we need to move into a subscription model, I think that's a good idea. That's thinking outside the box in my opinion,
Yeah,
which
no.
I think is good.
So it's a welcome move, and people are happy to see it that it's happening.
Yeah. I wanna pivot a bit, like, I love your your pivot into entrepreneurship, and you're a leading, well-known researcher in this space. You were also recognized for your leadership skills as a recipient of the CSIRO Impactful Leadership Award. I'd love to know, Christine, what does impactful leadership mean to you?
Yeah, so I guess I'd like to see that the things that I've done, it's not enough for me if I've just done it and it's worked for me, and the small circle around me. So I really think of impactful leadership as being able to share my experience and knowledge of the processes to benefit a wider group of people. So it's important to me that it's no good when people have to reinvent the wheel from scratch each time. That's just a waste of resources. So if I can help people start at a more advanced position than they would otherwise, then I regard that as impactful. And the more people I can benefit, then the more impact it is. So, I've benefited from the knowledge and experience of researchers and entrepreneurs before me. And I would like to make sure that I pass on what I've learned to the people around me and coming up behind me.
Yeah, amazing. And speaking about that, what's your advice that you'd give to other early stage scientists who's interested in translating their research into real world solutions? And, this is a very diverse, uh, s- we want to focus on more diverse audiences and too. So, especially to the younger female scientist who's interested in following your very inspirational career path, what advice do you give to them?
Yeah, so I think, look, thankfully it is getting easier to be involved better and earlier. So most states now will run networks of entrepreneurial efforts in medtech spaces. Get on their mailing lists, get involved, follow them on social media, talk to people about your research. One of the things I've done for quite a long time is, like, I write for sites like The Conversation in Australia. So that's a site where university-based academics write about areas that they're knowledgeable in, but for lay audiences. And so it's just a good way to share um, about particular things that you've learned that might be of interest to a broader audience. Get involved in those kinds of things. So, join networks, follow relevant agencies on social media, attend their events, write about your work, whether it's for your local newspaper or whether it's for a site like The Conversation. You've got to keep expanding your network all the time, talking to people about the possibilities of whatever you're working on and how it might have impact. Yeah, keep learning, keep growing, keep talking.
What's your networking tip?
Oh gosh.
Find it.
I don't know if one in particular. I think it's certainly, keep expanding, y- you know, keep expanding your network all the time. Look, it's not always easy. I just came back from an international conference. I didn't know many people at that conference. You just have to constantly put yourself into those awkward places where you go, right, I don't know anyone here. I'm just going to walk up to somebody and introduce myself. And you say, right, I'm going to do that at least 2 times a day for the next 5 days, and before you know it, you've met 10 people, if not 20 people. So, and then once you have met people and you find out what they're doing, you share what you're doing, you connect up on social media, all of a sudden the things that are coming across your feed are different, and enhanced. So you will find yourself in situations where you think, "Oh, I don't wanna meet another new person," but, it's the way to keep growing and expanding and learning. It's part and parcel of the job. You get used to it, you get better at it. Yeah, keep doing it.
It's so true, isn't it? Like, I feel like, I know that I'm a bit of an introvert as well, and you just go, "Gosh, it's hard," like, when you wanna try and go networking, and sometimes you just don't wanna do it. You're like, "Oh, I'd rather sit at home." But it is so important for anyone's career, everyone's career, to be honest, like, to go out and to meet more people and to challenge yourself. Like, I feel like now I'm a pretty good networker, if I can say that.
Yeah.
But it is at the very beginning was difficult. Like, you have to almost force yourself to go to an event and to go up and approach someone you don't know and say hello. And the thing is that most people aren't going to ignore you or, or whatever. Like, people are generally fairly nice, and you might leave with a friend or two,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
think that's what's really important. You just don't ever know what will happen further down the line to where things will lead. So, I agree with you. I think building networks is incredibly important. It's something that I always tell other people as something that they should definitely think about for their career.
Yeah, and I know it is easier for some people than others, but I think for a lot of people it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do, and you don't have to do great big grand gestures. It might just be right. I'm going to talk to one person that I don't know before I leave this place tonight. So you can start small and build from there. And like
Mm.
you say, I've never met anyone who've said, who's kind of responded with, "I don't know you. I don't want to know you. Go away." Like that is
Yeah.
never. They're usually in the same boat as you. So. Yeah.
I like to pick the ones who are standing by themselves because then that's an easy way to, not stand by yourself. So, so where do you see the future of antimicrobial resistance in the next 5 to 10 years? I know it's a big question. Do you see it becoming better or worse, Christy?
Look, I think that we have either the technology already or we have the capability to get it to manage the problem of antimicrobial resistance. Okay, so antimicrobial resistance is not going away. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better. But the good news is that we do have the tech or the capability to get the tech to manage it. It would be wonderful if there was one solution to antimicrobial resistance and it could be done over, but that's not the case. So, there are many interventions that will be required to work together to manage antimicrobial resistance. And because bacteria and fungi and viruses, every time they multiply, there's the potential for them to change and become resistant to whatever we're using against them. So, antimicrobial resistance is never going away, but we can learn how to manage it better, and we can use multiple approaches to help manage it. So I think we are going to get there. We're going to do better than we're currently doing now. Uh, it's it's a difficult road because it's a complex area, and I don't, there's a lot of really hardworking people, hardworking, clever people in this space, and sometimes I feel like we're all talking to each other and we're not talking to everybody else. So just, simply raising awareness about antimicrobial resistance and how it might impact everyday people who don't work in this area. That's an important part of the process as well. I think if people understand that there's a problem, you're more likely to build momentum to help address the problem.
Yeah.
So look, it can be done. We are going to manage it better than we currently do. But I tell you what, it's a long, hard road.
Yeah. And I'm very delighted to help raise some awareness and,
Yeah,
and education about this because I think it's really important. Like, just the amount of deaths that you're seeing every single year, that's only going to grow if we don't do
yeah,
something about this. So I feel like this is such an important area in terms of global public health that we need to be more aware of and to really do something about it. I do hope we can find more funding in this space.
yeah.
That's really important. So, what emerging technologies are you most excited about in the future of medtech, which is medical technology or health tech?
Yeah, so I guess my particular bias, is in that in vitro diagnostics, in that laboratory test space. And I'm quite intrigued by the impact that AI is having already in that space. Tests, things that we can measure. Sometimes the things that we measure, the data can be readily analyzed by, capabilities we've had for a long time. But there are some things that we measure where the data that we get is so rich, and now we have, AI powered analyses and AI powered software that can analyze that data much more quickly, much more efficiently, and much better than the humans were ever able to do in any meaningful way. before. So I think the impact of AI on laboratory tests is going to be huge. It's certainly having a, it's a big part of what we're doing with our test.
Mm.
So AI would be one thing. Oh gosh, there are the advances that are being made in DNA and RNA based technologies are also continuing to have a big impact. I mean, that's been ongoing for the last, 2 decades.
What are they? What are they, Christine?
So, the ability to detect, I guess, infections in my area is becoming better and more precise all the time. And, we can even sequence the whole genome of things, but much more quickly than ever before. There's advances to be made there. So, I guess AI and molecular technologies are the two biggies that loom large in my mind as they're going to have a big impact in the pathology laboratory test space.
Mm.
Yeah.
Do you think the AI has made your job easier, or are you scared about it? Like some people have been saying that they have been.
Certainly not scared of it. Look, it has definitely made, it has taken one of the technologies that's in our test, we use a flow cytometer. They've been around for 50, they've been in pathology laboratories in clinical labs for 50 years. So in that sense, that particular tech isn't new. Now there are some new features to our particular type of flow cytometry that have helped our test tremendously. But really, it's the ability to use AI to automate and to analyze the data that we get from flow cytometry, to analyze that data very precisely, very quickly, very efficiently. That's really part of what's been able to make our technology translatable into a pathology lab so readily. We know without that automated analysis, it was going to be a much more difficult task. So the AI looms large for me there.
Yeah, sounds like it was positive in your in your instance. So what keeps you motivated in your action against antimicrobial resistance?
Yeah. I guess it's the knowledge that it is such a big problem that it will take many multiple interventions ongoing to help manage it. We're just one small part of a whole lot of things that need to happen and continue happening to manage antimicrobial resistance. So that's certainly one motivating thing. Um, the idea that someone would have to wait 2 or 3 days to then be changed across to the right antibiotic, and they will have been receiving an antibiotic before then, but perhaps not the right one. And the idea that that still happens, you know, more often than it should, um, and for want of a better test. And, we've got that test. That's quite motivating. That idea that if our test was out there and being used, then that delay would be shortened dramatically in many cases. So that's pretty motivating. Uh,
Yeah. Are you a
I've
person who likes to solve big problems?
I wouldn't necessarily have thought that before now, but now, yes. I like problems in general. I like problem solving in general, but it's very rewarding to be addressing a big one. No doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. And what can the everyday person like myself do to help contribute against antimicrobial resistance? Or should we just all leave it to the scientists, to do everything?
Don't leave it just to the side. So there are so many things that everybody can do to help manage this problem of antimicrobial resistance. All contributions welcome. So just um, simply by reducing infections, you reduce the need to use antibiotics in the first place, and by not using antibiotics, you help extend the amount of time that they'll be effective, i.e., you help reduce the development of more antimicrobial resistance. So, really basic things like, washing your hands after you go to the bathroom, being vaccinated against the illnesses that you might otherwise catch. helps reduce the amount of illness and infection. And then obviously when people are sick, they end up with secondary infections. Often those secondary infections require antibiotics. There's your antimicrobial resistance again. So if you'd had your vaccine, you wouldn't be sick, you wouldn't get the secondary infection, you wouldn't need the antibiotics. So these sound like really simple things, but they are the cumulative effect of more people doing these things all the time, is less antimicrobial resistance. Start asking.
If you're sick, please stay home and don't go to the office. Don't go outside and give it to somebody else.
Yep. If you're visiting people who are vulnerable to infection, so that might be people who are receiving treatment for cancer, or that might be very elderly people, particularly if they're in aged care, then do your hand hygiene on the way through the door. It's not just a nice little process. Like it has a purpose, and it seems like a small contribution, but it's a genuine contribution. Yeah, lots of things that people can do on a day-to-day basis to help reduce antimicrobial resistance. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love how it's such a big problem to solve, and
Yes.
yet everyone can help
Yep.
contribute against it. So yeah, no, thank you for that. Last question. If others wants to get in contact with you, Christine, how can they do that?
Yeah, okay. So people can find Cytophenix has a website online. We're on LinkedIn, and they'll find our email address there. If they search for my name, my university affiliation will come up, so they can email me there. So yeah, always happy to hear from people who are interested in the area and want to know more, or perhaps want to share their experiences with us, particularly of antimicrobial resistant infections. Yep, love to hear from people.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Christine, thank you so much for joining us on Emerging Tech Unpacked. I was mind blown in terms of all the things that you were telling us about antimicrobial resistance, just the amount of just how big the problem is. I didn't really know how big the problem was until I started researching, and then obviously our conversation. And I really hope that more funding will go into this type of research. I think it's a really important area. And I love your inspiring journey from researcher to entrepreneur. Good luck with the journey. Good luck with the company. I hope you go very well. And thank you so much for your time, Christine.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Lucy. Yeah.
Thank you so much to Dr. Christine Carson for sharing her expertise and her inspiring journey from researcher to entrepreneur. Today's conversation made it clear antimicrobial resistance isn't just a problem for scientists or doctors to solve, it's a challenge that touches every aspect of our lives, from the food we eat to the medicines we depend on. As Christine emphasised, everyone has a role to play. Simple actions like practicing good hygiene, staying up to date with vaccinations, and using antibiotics responsibly can make a real difference. And behind the scenes, innovators like Christine and her team are working tirelessly to bring new solutions to the front lines of healthcare. I also loved how Christine's curiosity took her from asking a lot of questions as a scientist to now trying to solve global problems as an entrepreneur as her chosen career path. I'd like to extend a special thank you to the CSIRO On Innovation Program for their invaluable support. The On Innovation Program has played a pivotal role in helping researchers like Christine and her team to bridge the gap between academic discovery and real-world impact. Through hands-on learning, expert mentorship, and a vibrant network, the On Innovation Program empowers deep tech founders to turn innovative ideas into practical solutions that benefit society. We're grateful for their commitment to fostering Australia's next generation of science-driven entrepreneurs and for sponsoring this episode of Emerging Tech Unpacked. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends and networks so they can enjoy it too. I would very much appreciate it if you can support our podcast with a monthly donation and join our community on Patreon so I can cover my podcast expenses and to keep this show and our important mission of profiling incredible, diverse perspectives and fascinating emerging tech going. For more information about the latest episode and how to contact us for sponsorship, promotion, and guest speaking collaborations, visit our website, emergingtechunpacked.com. We are available in audio format on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also watch us on YouTube, and we have bonus video content there. Make sure to tap the notification bell so you will be informed of the latest episode drops. We are active on social media, so make sure to subscribe, like, and follow us on our social media channels: LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, to stay updated with the latest news and content. To get in contact with me, you can find me on LinkedIn by searching for Lucy Lin, or on my website, lucy-lin.com. We welcome all feedback and will be very grateful if you can help us grow and spread the word by forwarding this episode to a friend and giving us a 5-star review. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope I've unpacked antimicrobial resistance for you to better understand where the future of medtech is going and how we can do our part to contribute. My name is Lucy Lin, and thank you for listening to Emerging Tech Unpacked. Until next time, make sure to wash your hands constantly, stay at home when you're feeling unwell, and always finish a full course of prescribed antibiotics. See you in the next episode soon.